Welcome back to BlockTV. And every Sunday, the crypto community receives a treat in the form of a well-researched and thought-out Twitter thread by one of the top writers documenting the ecosystem. I'm talking, of course, about Nathaniel Whitmore and his acclaimed Long Read Sundays Twitter column, a bit of the New Yorker for Crypto Block News. Every week, we'll be joined by Nathaniel to present and discuss the highlights of the wide-ranging and thought-provoking research and break down his top 5 points for the week ahead. All right, Nathaniel, let's kick this off with number 5. And of course, the EOS-based social media system, Voice. What can you tell us?
Yeah, so this actually started as a rumor first. I think Bloomberg maybe broke their embargo, we later found out on Friday. But anyways, by kind of Friday afternoon, people were starting to talk about the idea that EOS was going to have a social network, a native social network for their platform. And so the first thread actually that I referred to was one that I had done, which is kind of like there's a meme in crypto and a narrative around this idea of decentralized alternatives to today's social networks. And I think it's a powerful conversation point right now, right? There's antagonism and sort of skepticism with platforms like Facebook is at an all-time high, and people are really wondering what these platforms, what their responsibilities are and how much power they should have. But at the same time, they're obviously integral in our lives. We can't really imagine a world in which we're not connected in the same way. And so the idea of a decentralized alternative that solves some of the problems is a powerful one to people. I think the challenge is how you get people to move, how you get people to actually go over and bootstrap the new network when network effects are so powerful. And so this first thread actually came out long before, or I guess at least a little bit before the Voice news actually broke and EOS announced the official platform. And the point that I was trying to make is that any platform that did arise was going to have to compete on the basis of some new social feature or some new hook that made people want to go and move their behavior over there rather than just ideology and rather than just the idea that a decentralized alternative would be better.
And that's something you raised that actually would need to get through that sort of lock-in system network effect, as you say, that so many have. But also, I suppose there's that issue, and you bring this up in another element of the thread where you refer to Jeff Goldberg's article, rather, from Medium, talking about the accountability problem in tech. But why isn't that having more of an effect? And can you break that down a little bit for us?
Sure. So I think what we learned when Voice was officially announced was that there was going to be a few different parts of the system and ways that they were trying to attract users effectively. One is the idea that creators would have, or people would have more control over their data, right? This has been a kind of a recurring theme. I think there's still big questions about what that means in any context, not just in Voice, but that was one of the pieces. A second piece is the idea that creators would actually get paid for their content and cut in with advertisers, and maybe the kind of the incentives would lie distributed across the network rather than just the network owner trying to capture all of the value. And I think there's a lot to dig into there. There's experiments already in crypto with platforms like Cent that are trying to use the hook of creators being paid for what they create on the platform. And I think it's an open question about how motivating that is. And you can see people arguing both sides of that. But then a third piece that Voice was promising was to try to address the bot problem and have actual, ensure effectively that all of the people who are using Voice are actual people. And that seems to me to be something that is notable, I guess, even in kind of the pantheon of potential features, just because the bot problem is so big in terms of the accountability of these platforms. I mean, I think Facebook deleted something like 2 billion accounts in Q1 of this year that were fake accounts. So, I mean, I guess the challenge is from a consumer standpoint, or I guess not from a consumer standpoint, from an observer standpoint, from a person who's kind of thinking about what's good for the world, the bot problem feels profound and it feels like an interesting thing for them to try to address. From an individual consumer standpoint, making a decision about where I'm going to spend my digital time, I don't know how much I care. So that's going to be a really interesting challenge for Voice to try to overcome. But I think the good thing and the exciting thing about it is they're trying things, and I feel like I want to see companies in crypto using their resources to try big things, to make a go at some of these decentralized alternatives, and we'll learn a lot no matter what.
Certainly. So it'll be interesting to see some innovation re-entering a sphere that perhaps has started to become a little bit stale. All right, now moving on to your number 4, and we have, of course, the Kick Legal Crypto Defend Crypto Legal Defense Fund, taking up a lot of the headlines. What can you tell us? You quoted Laura Shin's thread being stated there. What can you tell us about it?
Yeah, there's a lot that's going on here. So the beginning of the week was totally dominated by the conversation about Kick's Defend Crypto campaign. It was almost pre-heralded by Fred Wilson's Twitter thread from last weekend that we actually talked about on last week's show, on last week's Top 5. And then the news was kind of announced with this podcast on Laura Shin. By the way, as a total aside, I think it's interesting that people are announcing big news on podcasts, but that's neither here nor there. So anyways, the idea of Defend Crypto is effectively that Kick believes that its KIN token is not a security, that it's a currency, that it's more like a utility, that it's more like a commodity. It's used in applications that are built inside their ecosystem. And they are basically, those applications and the way that they use the currency would be totally hamstrung with the designation of a security. And so they want to go fight the SEC about this fact. And they've set aside $5 million to do so, but they've also kind of said that, hey, it might take more than $5 million. This is going to be a landmark case for crypto, even though it's specifically about KIN and Kick. And so, anyone who wants to be involved in that fight can contribute. And so this has really been pretty divisive, I think, in some ways in the crypto community. On the one hand, there are those who do recognize that this does have landmark case potential, and that Kick is going to kind of force an issue, basically, that is unresolved and unclear. At the same time, there are a lot of skeptical folks who perhaps were already bringing some skepticism about Kick and KIN with them with this, and see this kind of as just another way to basically non-dilutively raise capital to proceed as their operations as a company.
And this is sort of referring, as you've pointed out as well in your thread, to the statement by Jake Shavinsky talking about how this is the most important storyline happening through the crypto sphere at the moment. Help us break that down a little bit.
We live in a world where, I've actually called this like Schrodinger's securities right now. We really don't know whether these tokens are going to be considered as securities or not. Part of the reason, by the way, that this is so hard is that the SEC seems to think, and I think a lot of people agree, that they're securities at some point, like when they're being sold, and then they become not securities. And we don't really have rules that adapt to that. The challenge is that without those rules, people kind of have two choices. Do nothing in fear of later reprisal, or kind of play fast and loose and try to hope it works out. And neither of those situations are particularly conducive to real innovation and to real creation. And you've seen a situation where, even members of the SEC are kind of, vocally frustrated at the lack of, if not rules, at least some sort of regulatory sandboxes where good actors who are trying to be compliant can at least still continue to develop and innovate. So, I think Jake is absolutely right that love Kick or hate them or anything in between, this is going to be a massively important moment for the entire crypto space in the US and probably everywhere.
Certainly, it will be quite a moment. It'll be interesting to see if we get through some of those regulatory tests that have been holding back the crypto sphere, particularly in the US. All right, now let's move to your number 3 for this week, and two terms which I didn't think I'd get to utter very often, but I'm very pleased that I do, which is, of course, cyber balkanization and splinternet. Tell us how they become relevant in today's crypto sphere.
Yeah, I mean, big kudos to Jeff John Roberts for the term splinternet. That's one of those terms when you hear it, you're like, all right, that's going to be a thing.
Certainly. It keeps ringing off the tongue. I've been using it multiple times throughout the day, and I just heard it.
Right. Well, that's the thing, is it actually describes a really a concept that I think that we all feel, especially those of us. One of the things that's amazing about crypto is how global it is. I mean, even this conversation that we're having right now is testament to that fact. And the people who are in this industry, I think, deal and interact with people from other places much more frequently in kind of a day-to-day way than in a lot of different spaces. And it's hard not to feel already that there is this kind of growing balkanization of the internet based on, what different regulatory regimes think. And you have kind of the challenge of this is that it's not just for bad intentions. It's not just about Iran targeting certain ISPs that aren't saying things that they like or anything like that. That's a part of it. But you also have, well-intentioned but potentially burdensome rules, right? So in the wake of the Christchurch massacre, Australia actually passed very, very aggressive legislation that effectively said that they could go after ISPs even for hosting content from violent crimes. And Ben Thompson from Stratechery wrote about this right after, and he was like, look, it's well-intentioned law, but what's going to happen is that any rational business that has a choice is just going to pack up and leave. And you see this kind of happening all over. And it's a real challenge because we're caught on the one hand between this need to keep people safe and secure, and on the other hand, the needs of sovereignty and liberty and freedom and mobility, basically. And so I think that this is playing out across the internet, not just in crypto. Crypto is becoming a new front for this as it relates to regulatory regimes and the movement of money.
Certainly it is, and we're seeing this play out not just in small businesses, but even in some of the biggest businesses out there in the crypto sphere. Binance itself setting up geo-blockers even in the United States.
Yeah, so this was kind of another piece that was interesting and just kind of reinforced this point. So Binance Dex, which is a non-custodial exchange, which I think launched in April of this year, is basically going to geo-block 29 countries, including the U.S. and a whole slew of other countries that we'd probably rather not be associated with. And again, it's two things. This is, I guess, one, it is, I think, a little bit of a testament to what the people who are pushing the Defend Crypto campaign are arguing for, that to the extent that the U.S. regulatory regime either A, is aggressive and kind of negative towards these crypto assets, or B, even just continues to not provide proper guidance, you're going to see people who are kind of moving offshore and taking their businesses elsewhere because they just don't know how to operate. And so, I think it's how much the Binance Dex not allowing, U.S. IPs to work, like practically speaking, there's ways to get around it and whatever. It's not kind of the biggest part of the Binance ecosystem. That's fine. I think it's more emblematic of what's likely to happen, and sort of another example of this splinter net idea.
And certainly it'll be interesting to see if they do get a control of that. But moving now to your number 2 for this week is an interesting counterbalance to this idea of the splinter net and regulatory control, these decentralized autonomous organizations and what they're doing. Explain a little bit about how that experiment's being put into action.
Yeah, so DAOs are really interesting for a number of reasons. One of them being that I think because of the DAO hack, the original DAO hack, the sort of effort and excitement around DAOs dissipated for a little while. And strangely, during the ICO boom, when everyone was kind of tokenizing everything and wanting to decentralize everything, you weren't hearing that much about DAOs. And in some ways, I feel like that may have been to the benefit of the creative sandbox for DAOs, because there wasn't so much energy and focus and, charlatans kind of coming in. But now what you have is you have a really interesting and robust infrastructure starting to emerge for decentralized organizations. So you have Colony and you have Aragon and you have a number of platforms that are basically giving people tools to self-organize in ways that are more formal than a Facebook group, but less formal, or at least less kind of laborious than something like a traditional nonprofit or a traditional for-profit business. And so Jesse Walden from Andreessen Horowitz, who's a really great follow on Twitter, he's always posting interesting things, just put together effectively a massive thread of all of the interesting experiments that he's seeing with DAOs and with crypto governance. And I think that this is, the reason that this provides an interesting counterweight to some of the kind of idea of the splinter net is these types of tools are effectively making it much simpler for people to organize and build things across borders and kind of work in non-traditional ways.
It certainly is providing that non-traditional workplace environment, but I suppose now you need that extra element of that. And let's finally move to your number 1 point for this week. the idea that, as brought up by Denis Nazarov, the idea that people are going to actually need to be employed in this field. You know, so often it's talked about, the cryptosphere is talked about as a place for cypherpunks and crypto anarchists, but actually you will need employment in that, and as people move into this field, it'll become ever more important.
Yeah, the reason that I chose this as the number one, I think it's very easy in crypto to find things that are either chaotic or frustrating or up in the air. One thing that Dennis, also actually from Andreessen Horowitz, they had a 1 and a 2 today. But one of the things that he points out, which I completely agree with, is that there's kind of this unabated talent influx into this space that has continued even during last year's bear market, and I imagine is going to do nothing but increase now. And I think one of the things that was so interesting about this thread is he was looking at all the reasons why, and it wasn't just kind of one thing, like people having to be super passionate or interested even in financial technology. It was this whole set of different factors, including like the globalism that we were just referring to, the fact that this is a really global industry that is by and large built on remote work. The fact that there's such a mission orientation for people who are early in this space and trying to build things now. And I think, when it comes to the extent to which we're cynical or optimistic at any given moment about the crypto industry, for me, the biggest factor that always tips me towards the positive and towards that way of looking at the space is the talent that I continue to see coming in. So I thought this was a great thread about why one of the most important realities of our space is playing out as it is.
Yeah, it certainly is. It was interesting to see what that next generation of crypto users and workers are going to look like moving forward. All right, well, I want to thank you, Nathaniel Whitmore, for help breaking down your long read Sundays, giving us a bit of a bird's eye view and look into the industry as a whole and a bit of a deep dive into some of the key points. All right, thank you so much, Nathaniel, for being with us. And of course, stay with BlockTV. You can reach out to us Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Let us know what you think of the deep stories we've covered this week. And of course, keep watching at blocktv.com. I'm Asher Westrop Evans. Thanks for watching.